In this first lab, the problem we were solving was finding the charge on a piece of tape. We used household materials in order to measure the tape, and then to stick the tape on in order to perform certain tests. We created U-tape by creating a small handle for the tape by folding it over on itself a bit on the ends, and then ripping two pieces apart so it was no longer neutral. The two tapes that we ripped apart would have opposite charges due to conservation of charge, since their initial charge was nothing. But then we always kept one tape on the table, so the tapes that were ripped off always ended up with the same charge. And then we used these same tapes that we ripped off for the experiments, so they would all have either positive or negative charge. We found that the U-tape ended up having positive charge because it was known that a plastic pen acquires a negative charge when rubbed against hair, which is what was done, and then the pen attracted the tape, suggesting it is positively charged, since opposite charges attract. It was important to only touch the tapes on the ends and try not to touch them very much, because the charged tapes would be neutralized by the ions on your skin, as shown in the pictures below. This would also happen if the tape came into contact with any other neutral object, because the charge would spread out over a larger area, making the tape almost neutral in this case as well, and not perform very well in any of the experiments. Some of our findings in order to solve our problem included the magnitude of the gravitational force, F equals mg, gravitational force equals mass times the gravitational constant, and therefore the magnitude of the electric force. This was done by achieving the two tapes to float above one another, since they repel due to their like charge, and then knowing that at that instant the net force is zero. This is justified using Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration. Since acceleration equals zero, net force must equal zero, meaning the two forces must be equal and opposite, and the only two forces acting on the tape are the electric force and gravitational force. So therefore they must be equal in magnitude. We then found the deficiency of electrons on the tape. We knew it was a deficiency and not an excess of electrons, since the tape is positively charged, and a lack of electrons is what creates this positive charge. This was done by finding the charge Q using the formula for electric field, and then dividing the charge Q by the charge of a single electron. We then found the number of atoms on the sticky surface of the tape in order to find the ratio of the number of deficient electrons to the number of atoms on the sticky surface of the tape. The problem with this is we assumed that all of the atoms were the same size on the sticky surface of the tape. This may not be true, and if it was not true, this would cause our number of atoms on the sticky surface of the tape to be inaccurate, and therefore our ratio to be incorrect. Some physics principles demonstrated in this lab is that we know that like charges repel and opposite charges attract, and that an object with a negative net charge has an excess of electrons, and an object with a positive net charge has a deficiency of electrons, as demonstrated with the tape. Conservation of charge was also demonstrated, knowing that the net charge of a system plus its surroundings cannot change. In the case of the tapes, they were originally neutral, and then when we ripped them apart, one had a positive charge and one had a negative charge. Charge transfer was also shown when our hands neutralized the tape when it was handled too much. If the electrons had a positive charge and protons had a negative charge, the U-tape that we used would have ended up being negatively charged. They would still interact the same with neutral objects, but then they would attract positive objects and repel negative, which would now be like-charged objects. The tape would have an opposite reaction with the pen, since the pen was negatively charged. It would have been repelled by the pen, since the tape would also be negative charged, and like charges repel. Overall, this lab was a very helpful introduction to the class and in learning more about how charges work.